The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Cedar Ridge, Montana, as folks gathered near the courthouse steps. It was September of 1887, and the air carried that peculiar mix of late summer heat and approaching autumn chill that marked the changing seasons in this unforgiving land. Martha Collins stood alone in the center of the crowd, her wrists bound with rough hemp rope, her chin raised despite the trembling in her legs. She was 28 years old, though the harsh years had etched lines around her green eyes that made her look older. Her auburn hair, once her pride, hung loose and tangled down her back, a deliberate humiliation imposed by the Wheaton family, her late husband's kin. They demanded this public punishment, invoking an old ordinance that few remembered but none dared challenge. "Martha Collins," bellowed Judge Wheaton, brother to her deceased husband, his voice carrying across the silent crowd. "You stand accused of failing in your sacred duty as a wife. 3 years of marriage to my brother Samuel, God rest his soul, and not one child to carry on the Wheaton name. The family demands recompense for this grievous failing." Martha's jaw clenched. She wanted to scream the truth that Samuel had been cruel, that his drinking had left him incapable of being a proper husband, that the fault had never been hers. But what good would it do in Cedar Ridge? A woman's word against a powerful family meant nothing. The crowd murmured, some in agreement, others shifting uncomfortably. Old Mrs. Henderson clutched her shawl tighter, remembering her own struggles with childbearing. Young Tom Bradley, the blacksmith's apprentice, looked away, unable to watch what was about to unfold. "The punishment," Judge Wheaton continued, his thick mustache twitching with barely concealed satisfaction, "shall be 100 strikes with the strap, as permitted by territorial law for crimes against family honor." Martha heard gasps from some of the women, but none stepped forward. Fear of the Wheaton family ran deep in Cedar Ridge. They owned the largest cattle operation for 50 miles, controlled the water rights, and had the sheriff in their pocket. Jacob Wheaton, Samuel's younger brother, stepped forward with the leather strap. His eyes glinted with something darker than justice. He'd always resented that Samuel had married Martha instead of the wealthy Carson girl from Denver. Now, with Samuel dead from a horse accident 6 months past, Jacob saw his chance for revenge. "Turn around," he commanded. Martha did as she was told, her hands still bound before her. She fixed her gaze on the distant mountains, those purple-shadowed peaks that promised freedom she'd never taste. The first strike came without warning, tearing through the thin fabric of her dress and sending fire across her back. She bit down hard, tasting blood, refusing to cry out. By the 20th strike, her knees buckled. By the 40th, she was on the ground, her fingers clawing at the dirt. The crowd had thinned, many couldn't stomach the sight, but the Wheaton men stood firm, counting each blow with grim satisfaction. "That's enough," a voice called out around the 60th strike. Doc Morrison pushed through the remaining crowd, his medical bag in hand. "You'll kill her." "Stay back, doctor," warned Sheriff Hayes, his hand on his pistol. "This is legal business." Doc Morrison's face flushed red with anger, but he knew Hayes was right. The law, twisted as it was, permitted this barbarity. He could only watch as Jacob continued, though with less enthusiasm now that someone had spoken against it. When the 100th strike finally fell, Martha lay still in the dust. Her back was a ruin of torn fabric and welts. The crowd dispersed quickly, ashamed now of what they'd witnessed, what they'd allowed. Only the Wheaton family remained, standing over her like vultures. "Let this be a lesson," Judge Wheaton announced to the empty street, "about the sanctity of family obligations." They left her there, assuming someone would eventually help her or that she'd crawl away on her own. It was Doc Morrison who finally approached, cutting the ropes from her wrists with shaking hands. "Dear God, Martha," he whispered, helping her to sit up. "Let me take you to my office." "No," she croaked, her voice raw from suppressed screams. "The shed! Take me to my shed!" The doctor wanted to argue, but he saw the fierce pride still burning in her eyes. The shed, a ramshackle structure on the outskirts of town that the Wheatons had graciously allowed her to occupy after Samuel's death, was all she had left. He helped her to her feet, supporting most of her weight as they made their slow, painful way down the street. Behind curtains and through cracked doors, the townspeople watched, their faces masks of pity and relief that it wasn't them. "This ain't right, Martha," Doc Morrison muttered as they walked. "There's got to be something." "There's nothing," Martha interrupted, each word an effort. "They own this town. They own everything." The shed, when they reached it, was even worse than the doctor remembered. Gaps in the walls let in wind and rain. The roof sagged dangerously, and the door hung crooked on one hinge. Inside was a straw mattress, a wooden crate that served as a table, and precious little else. Doc Morrison cleaned and dressed her wounds as best he could, leaving her with a bottle of laudanum for the pain. "I'll check on you tomorrow," he promised. "Don't," Martha said quietly. "It'll only bring you trouble." After he left, Martha lay on her side on the thin mattress, staring at the wall. The pain was excruciating, but worse was the humiliation. The knowledge that everyone in Cedar Ridge now saw her as the barren woman who'd been whipped like a horse. As darkness fell, she could hear the town settling into evening routines, families gathering for supper, children being called inside, the saloon beginning its nightly revelry, normal life continuing as if a woman hadn't been brutalized in the town square that very morning. Martha closed her eyes. Not to sleep, sleep was impossible with the fire across her back, but to remember. She remembered arriving in Cedar Ridge 5 years ago, full of hope. She remembered meeting Samuel Wheaton, how charming he'd been during their brief courtship. She remembered her wedding day, before she learned what kind of man Samuel really was. Most of all, she remembered her dreams of children, of a real home, of a family gathered around a dinner table. Dreams that had been beaten out of her as surely as the skin had been flayed from her back. A coyote howled in the distance, and Martha found herself envying it. At least the coyote was free. At least it could run. The wagon wheels creaked against the rutted road as James Turner guided his team of horses into Cedar Ridge. 3 small faces peered out from behind the canvas cover his children, wide-eyed at the prospect of visiting town after weeks on their isolated homestead. 8-year-old Benjamin sat tall, trying to look grown up, while 6-year-old Sarah clutched her rag doll, and 4-year-old little Thomas sucked his thumb despite his siblings' protests that he was too old for such habits. James was 32, with shoulders broadened by years of military service and farm work, his face weathered but kind, marked by laugh lines that had deepened into permanent creases since his wife Mary's death 2 years prior. He'd been a cavalry soldier once, had seen his share of hardship on the frontier, but nothing had prepared him for raising 3 children alone while trying to make a failing homestead profitable. "Papa, can we get candy?" Sarah asked, her voice hopeful. "We'll see. Sweetheart, first, we need supplies and to ask about water rights at the land office." He'd chosen Cedar Ridge specifically because of rumors about available water access essential for the expanded farming he planned. The cattle ranching that dominated the area wasn't for him. He'd seen enough death in the cavalry. He wanted to grow things, to nurture life from the soil. The town seemed subdued as they rolled down Main Street. Folks went about their business, but there was a tension in the air. Conversations held in hushed tones, eyes that darted away when he nodded in greeting. James pulled up outside Morrison's general store, helping his children down from the wagon. "Stay close," he instructed, noting the strange atmosphere. Inside the store, Mr. Morrison, brother to the town doctor, was sorting through a shipment of goods. He looked up as the bell chimed, his expression warming at the sight of children. "New in town?" he asked. "James Turner." James offered his hand. "Homesteading about 10 miles north. These are my children, Benjamin, Sarah, and Thomas." "Welcome to Cedar Ridge," Morrison said, though his smile didn't reach his eyes. "Though I'll warn you, you've arrived at a peculiar time." Before James could ask what he meant, the door opened again. A woman entered, moving slowly, carefully, as if each step caused pain. She wore a faded brown dress that had been mended many times, and a shawl pulled tight around her shoulders despite the warm afternoon. Her auburn hair was pinned up severely, and she kept her eyes downcast as she approached the counter. "Mrs. Collins?" Morrison greeted her, his voice gentle. "How can I help you today?" "I need—" she began, then stopped, noticing James and his children. Her green eyes flickered with something fear, shame, or perhaps both before returning to the counter. "I need laudanum, and perhaps some bread, if you could extend credit." She placed a few coins on the counter, barely enough for the medicine, let alone food. James noticed her hands trembling as she counted them out. Morrison's face creased with sympathy. "Martha, you know I'd like to help, but the Wheatons have made it clear." "I understand," she interrupted quickly, gathering her coins. "Just the laudanum, then?" "Wait," James heard himself say. Both Martha and Morrison turned to him in surprise. "Add the bread to my order, and whatever else the lady needs." Martha's eyes widened. "I couldn't—" "It's no trouble," James insisted. He'd seen hardship before, recognized it in the careful way she moved, the pride battling necessity in her expression. "Consider it a welcome gift to a new neighbor." "You don't understand," Morrison said quietly, glancing toward the window. "Mrs. Collins is, well, the Wheaton family has made their position clear about anyone who—" "I don't care about the Wheaton's position," James said firmly. "Ma'am, please, get what you need." Martha stared at him for a long moment, as if trying to puzzle out his motives. Sarah tugged on James's sleeve. "Papa, is the lady sick?" "Hush, Sarah," James said gently. But Martha had already turned to the little girl. "I'm just a little tired, sweet one," she said, managing a small smile that transformed her face, revealing the beauty beneath the exhaustion and pain. "My mama was tired too, before she went to heaven," Sarah announced matter-of-factly. "Papa says she's resting now." Martha's expression softened further. "I'm sorry about your mama." "Me too," Sarah said. "Do you have any little girls?" The question hit Martha like a physical blow. James saw her sway slightly, gripping the counter for support. "No," she whispered. "No children." Morrison quickly gathered supplies bread, some salt pork, beans, and the laudanum, wrapping them in brown paper. Martha tried once more to protest, but James wouldn't hear it. "At least let me help you carry these home," James offered. "No." The word came out sharper than Martha intended. She softened her tone. "Thank you, but no. You've done more than enough, more than anyone has done in—" She trailed off, gathering the packages carefully. "Thank you, Mr. Turner." She left quickly, but not before James caught sight of dark stains on the back of her dress where the shawl had shifted. Blood stains, partially healed but still visible. After she'd gone, James turned to Morrison. "What happened to her, eh?" Morrison glanced around the store, ensuring no one else was listening. "You really don't know the whole territory's been talking about it. 3 days ago, the Wheaton family had her publicly punished. 100 lashes for failing to give Samuel Wheaton an heir before he died." James felt his blood run cold. "That's barbaric." "That's Cedar Ridge when you cross the Wheatons," Morrison said bitterly. "They own most of the land, control the water, have the sheriff and judge in their pocket. Martha Collins is lucky they let her live." "Papa," Benjamin piped up. "That's not right. Is it hurting a lady?" "No, son," James said quietly, his jaw clenched. "It's not right at all." He completed his purchases, his mind churning. He'd come to Cedar Ridge seeking a fresh start, a place to raise his children in peace. Instead, he'd found a town ruled by cruelty. As they loaded the wagon, James spotted Martha Collins making her slow way down the street. People stepped aside, avoiding her as if she carried disease. He saw her stumble once, catching herself against a hitching post, pausing to gather strength before continuing. "Papa," Sarah said, "can we help the sad lady?" James thought of Mary, how she would have answered. His wife had always said that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but doing what was right despite it. "Wait here with your brothers," he told Sarah, then jogged after Martha. He caught up to her near the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to scrubland. "Mrs. Collins," he called. She turned, alarm in her eyes. "Mr. Turner, please, you shouldn't be seen." "I was cavalry for 8 years," he interrupted. "I've seen what damage a whip can do. You need proper medical attention." "I've managed," she said stiffly. "Have you?" He gestured to the spots of fresh blood beginning to seep through her dress. "Those wounds will fester without proper care." "And what would you have me do?" Martha snapped, exhaustion making her bold. "The doctor can't be seen helping me too often. The Wheatons have made me a pariah. I'm fortunate they allow me to stay in that shed on what was once my husband's land." "Then let me help," James said. "I have medical supplies at my homestead. My Mary taught me about healing before she passed." Martha studied him, this stranger who seemed determined to show her kindness. "Why?" she asked simply. James thought for a moment. "Because someone should. Because it's right. Because my children are watching. And I want them to learn that we don't turn away from people who need help. The Wheatons will make trouble for you." "Let them try," James said, surprising himself with his vehemence. "I've faced down Confederate cavalry and Apache warriors. I'm not afraid of some puffed-up cattle barons." For the first time, Martha actually smiled a real smile, not the pained approximation from earlier. "You're either very brave or very foolish, Mr. Turner." "Probably both," he admitted. "Now, will you let me help you? Or do I have to follow you home and camp outside that shed until you agree?" Martha looked back toward the wagon, where 3 small faces were watching intently. "Your children need you whole and safe. Mr. Turner, don't risk that for a stranger." "Sometimes," James said quietly. "The biggest risk is doing nothing at all." The week following their first encounter, James Turner made 3 trips to Martha's shed, each time bringing supplies and medicine under the pretense of needing directions or advice about the local area. The townspeople noticed. Of course, in a place like Cedar Ridge, nothing went unobserved, especially when it concerned the town's most notorious outcast. "That new homesteader's been seeing the Collins woman." "Mrs." Garrett whispered to her neighbor over the fence. "Mark my words, no good will come of it." "Fool man," her neighbor agreed. "The Wheatons won't stand for it." But James continued his visits, undeterred by the growing whispers. On his 4th visit, he brought his children along, despite Martha's protests from behind her barely functioning door. "Mr. Turner, please," she called out, not opening the door fully. "This isn't proper. Your children shouldn't—" "My children should learn that we help our neighbors," James said firmly. "Besides, Sarah made you something." The little girl stepped forward, holding out a small bouquet of wildflowers she'd picked along the way. "For you, Mrs. Collins. Papa says flowers make people feel better." Martha's resolve crumbled. She opened the door wider, accepting the flowers with shaking hands. "They're beautiful. Sarah, thank you." In the daylight, James could see her more clearly. The wounds were healing, thanks to his ministrations, but she moved stiffly, carefully. Her face, though, showed something worse than physical pain, a deep, abiding hopelessness that seemed to have settled into her very bones. "I brought lumber," James announced, gesturing to his wagon. "This roof won't survive the first winter storm." "I can't pay you." "I'm not asking for payment. Benjamin here needs to learn carpentry." And this is good practice. Right, son. Benjamin nodded eagerly, already pulling boards from the wagon. Even little Thomas wanted to help, carrying nails in his chubby fists. As they worked, Martha found herself drawn outside, watching this family that moved with such easy harmony. James was patient with his sons, showing Benjamin how to measure twice and cut once, praising Thomas for his help, even when the boy mostly just made things harder. "Your wife taught them well," Martha said softly. James paused in his hammering. "Mary would have liked you. She always said the measure of a person wasn't in what happened to them, but in how they faced it. And if they fail in the facing of it, then they try again." James said simply, "That's all any of us can do." As the sun reached its zenith, Sarah tugged on Martha's skirt. "Mrs. Collins, do you know any stories?" Martha looked down at the child, surprised. I used to know some." "Would you tell me one Papa's stories are all about soldiers and horses?" Despite herself, Martha found herself sitting on an overturned crate, Sarah at her feet, telling an old tale her grandmother had shared about a brave princess who saved her kingdom. As she spoke, Benjamin and even Thomas drifted over to listen, their work temporarily forgotten. James watched from his perch on the roof, something warm unfurling in his chest. His children hadn't been this engaged, this happy, since Mary's death. The moment was shattered by the thunder of approaching hooves. 3 riders appeared, dust swirling around them like harbingers of doom. Jacob Wheaton led them, his face dark with anger. "Turner," he spat, dismounting with a deliberate menace. "You're new here, so maybe you don't understand how things work." James climbed down from the roof slowly, positioning himself between the Wheaton men and his children. "I understand plenty, Mr. Wheaton." "Do you?" Jacob's eyes flicked to Martha, who had instinctively shrunk back. "This woman is a disgrace. She's been judged and punished by the law of this town. Anyone who aids her shares in her shame." "The only shame I see," James said quietly, "is grown men who beat a defenseless woman and call it justice." Jacob's hand moved to his gun. "You watch your tongue, stranger." "Papa?" Benjamin's voice was small, frightened. "Take your sister and brother inside. Ben," James said, never taking his eyes off Jacob. "Inside where?" Jacob laughed cruelly. "This hovel you'd have your children associate with this barren witch." Martha flinched as if struck. James saw it, and something cold and dangerous filled his eyes, something his fellow soldiers had seen in battle. "Mr. Wheaton," he said, his voice deadly calm. "You're going to get on your horse and leave. Now." "You threatening me?" "Turner, I'm telling you that I've fought in 3 wars and buried my wife. I've got nothing left to lose except my children, and I'll do whatever necessary to protect them from men who think cruelty is strength." One of Jacob's companions, an older man named Hank Barnett, shifted nervously. "Come on, Jacob, we've made our point." But Jacob wasn't finished. "You know what she is. Turner, a failed woman. 3 years married to my brother, and not one child. What kind of woman can't do the one thing God designed her for?" The words hung in the air like poison. Martha stood abruptly, her face white. "Excuse me," she whispered, disappearing into the shed. James heard her muffled sob and felt rage build in his chest. "Get out," he growled. "Get out before I forget my children are watching." Jacob smirked, but something in James's expression made him step back. "This isn't over. Turner, you've chosen the wrong side." After they rode off, James found Martha inside, sitting on her thin mattress, tears streaming down her face, his children huddled near the doorway, uncertain. "Sarah," James said gently, "why don't you sing Mrs. Collins, that song your mama taught you, the one about the mockingbird?" Sarah nodded, her sweet voice filling the small space. As she sang, Martha's sobs quieted. Thomas climbed onto the mattress beside her, patting her hand with his small one. "Don't cry," he said solemnly. "Papa says tears water the flowers in heaven." Martha looked at this little boy, so earnest, so kind, and something broke inside her, not the sharp breaking of her punishment, but a gentle cracking, like ice beginning to thaw. Mrs. Collins," Benjamin said seriously. "Those men were wrong. My mama couldn't have babies after Thomas, and she cried about it sometimes, but Papa always told her she was perfect just as she was." James knelt beside Martha. "My son's right. A woman's worth isn't measured by children or lack thereof. It's measured by her character, her strength, her kindness." "You don't understand," Martha whispered. "My husband, Samuel, he told everyone it was my fault. But the truth is—" She stopped, unable to continue. "The truth doesn't matter to men like the Wheatons," James said. "But it matters to me." Martha looked at him then, really looked at him. This man who'd appeared in her life like an unexpected sunrise, bringing warmth she'd forgotten existed. "Why are you doing this?" James was quiet for a moment, listening to Sarah's song ending. "Maybe because I'm selfish. My children need more than I can give them alone. They need to see that goodness exists, that helping others matters, that standing up to bullies is worth the risk. You're teaching them that just by enduring." "I'm barely enduring," Martha admitted. "That's still more than most could manage." James said. He stood, gathering his children. "We'll be back tomorrow to finish the roof." "You shouldn't—" "Tomorrow," he repeated firmly. "And Mrs. Collins, Martha, you're not alone anymore. Not if I have anything to say about it." As they left, Martha moved to the doorway, watching the wagon disappear down the road. For the first time in months, she felt something besides pain and shame. It was small, fragile as a candle flame, but it was their hope. That night, as she lay on her mattress under the partially repaired roof, she heard no rain, saw no stars through gaps in the wood. James Turner had done more than fix her shelter. He'd begun to patch the holes in her spirit. Meanwhile, in the Wheaton ranch house, Jacob paced before the fireplace. "That Turner needs to be taught a lesson," he growled. Judge Wheaton, older and craftier than his nephew, shook his head. "Not yet. Let him dig his own grave a bit deeper. When we move against him, we want the whole town to understand why. Martha Collins is a blight on this community, and anyone who stands with her will share her fate." The first snow of winter came early that year, October winds carrying white flakes that danced and swirled across the Montana landscape. James Turner stood at Martha's door, his breath visible in the frigid air, his children bundled in the wagon behind him. For 6 weeks now, he'd maintained his visits, despite increasing pressure from the town and escalating threats from the Wheaton clan. Tonight was different. Tonight, the Wheatons had made their move. "Martha!" he called urgently. "Open up, please!" The door cracked open, revealing Martha's worried face. She'd grown healthier in the past weeks, the regular meals James brought and the medicine doing their work, but concern creased her features now. "James, what's wrong? It's past dark." "They burned my barn," he said flatly. "The Wheatons killed 2 of my milk cows, scattered the chickens, left a note saying worse would come if I didn't stop seeing you." Martha's face went white. "Oh, James, no, I told you this would happen. You have to stay away. Your children—" "My children are the reason I'm here," James interrupted. He turned to the wagon. "Ben, bring your sister and brother inside. It's too cold to wait out there." As the children scrambled down, Martha stepped back, shaking her head. "You can't be here. If they see your wagon—" "Let them see it," James said, his voice hard as winter ground. "I'm done running from bullies." Once inside the small shed, much improved now, with James's repairs, the children huddled near the small stove he'd installed 2 weeks prior. Sarah crawled into Martha's lap without hesitation, a gesture that had become natural over their many visits. Mrs. Martha, Sarah said, using the name she'd adopted for her. Are the bad men going to hurt you again? Martha smoothed the girl's hair, her heart aching. No, sweetheart. Your papa won't let them. James paced the small space, his military bearing evident in his measured steps. I've been thinking, he began, then stopped, running his hand through his dark hair. This is probably the worst idea I've ever had, but... James, Martha prompted, confused by his agitation. He dropped to one knee suddenly, right there on the rough wooden floor. Martha gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Martha Collins, he said formally. Will you marry me? The shed fell silent except for the crackling of the stove. Even the children seemed to hold their breath. James, Martha whispered. You don't know what you're saying. The town already shuns me. If you marry me, they'll what burn my barn already done. Threaten my family. They're doing that anyway. He reached for her free hand, the one not holding Sarah. Martha, I'm not asking out of pity. These past weeks, watching you with my children, seeing your strength, your kindness despite everything you've endured. I'm asking because I want you in our lives, permanently. But I can't, Martha's voice broke. James, I can't give you children. You know what they say about me. I have 3 children who adore you, James said firmly. And what they say about you is lies spread by cruel men. I don't care if we never have more children. I care that Ben smiles when you help him with his reading. I care that Sarah sings more since she met you. I care that Thomas actually ate his vegetables when you told him they'd make him strong. You'd be marrying a ruined woman, Martha said, tears flowing freely now. The whole territory knows what happened to me. I'd be marrying a survivor, James corrected. A woman who faced injustice and didn't break. That's the kind of strength I want my daughter to learn. Benjamin stepped forward, his young face serious. Mrs. Martha, we voted, even Thomas. We want you to be our new mama. Martha looked at these faces, James's earnest and determined, the children's hopeful and loving. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the walls. But inside, in this tiny, patched-up shed, she felt warmer than she had in years. The Wheatons will come after you even harder, she warned. I've sent word to Fort Benton, James revealed. I have friends from my cavalry days. They're sending a federal marshal to investigate the Wheaton family's land grabs and their private system of justice. Things are going to change in Cedar Ridge. Martha's eyes widened. You've been planning this. For 2 weeks now, James admitted. Ever since Jacob Wheaton threatened my children. His expression darkened. That was his mistake. I would have endured his harassment of me. But threatening Ben, Sarah, and Thomas, that crossed a line. Papa's angry face, Thomas announced solemnly, recognizing his father's expression. Despite everything, Martha laughed a real laugh that seemed to surprise her. Yes, little one, your papa's angry face is quite something. James's expression softened as he looked at her. Is that a yes? Martha looked around the shabby shed, then at the family before her. Outside was cold, harsh, unforgiving. The Wheatons would indeed make their lives difficult. The town would gossip and condemn. But here, in this moment, was something she'd never thought to have again a chance at family, at love, at belonging. I don't even have a proper dress, she said weakly. You could wear a grain sack and still be the most beautiful bride in Montana, James said, causing her to blush. That's gross, Papa, Benjamin said, making everyone laugh. Martha took a deep breath, feeling as if she stood on the edge of a cliff. But then Sarah squeezed her hand, and Thomas patted her knee, and Benjamin grinned at her with gap-toothed excitement, and the decision became simple. Yes, she whispered, then stronger. Yes, James Turner, I'll marry you. James stood, pulling her to her feet. Sarah still clinging to her. We'll marry tomorrow. Reverend Davis owes me a favor from when I helped with his roof. He'll perform the ceremony regardless of what the Wheatons say. Tomorrow, Martha's head spun. But the longer we wait, the more time they have to interfere, James said pragmatically. Besides, my children need a proper mother, and that shed needs to be abandoned for a real home. Our home, Sarah corrected, beaming. A loud crack split the air, a gunshot. The window shattered, and James immediately pushed everyone to the floor, covering them with his body. Turner, Jacob Wheaton's voice carried through the night. You've got 1 minute to come out, or we burn this shack with everyone in it. James met Martha's terrified eyes. Stay down, all of you. He checked his revolver, a smooth, practiced motion from his military days. James, no, Martha gripped his arm. There's too many of them. Then we'd better hope that federal marshal rides fast, James said grimly. He kissed her forehead quickly. Whatever happens, know that asking you to marry me was the best decision I've made since Mary passed. He stood, calling out, I'm coming out. Wheaton! But if you harm anyone in this building, know that I've written letters to every newspaper from here to Chicago about what you did to Mrs. Collins. Your family's shame will be known from coast to coast. It was a bluff, but Jacob didn't know that. James opened the door. Stepping into the swirling snow, 5 men on horseback faced him, torches casting demonic shadows on their faces. You've made your choice. Turner, Judge Wheaton said from his mount. You could have been a respectable citizen of Cedar Ridge. Instead, you've allied yourself with a barren woman who couldn't even... His words were cut short by the sound of multiple horses approaching fast. Through the snow came a dozen riders, all wearing badges that gleamed in the torchlight. Federal Marshal John Henderson, the lead rider announced, his voice carrying absolute authority. I'm placing the Wheaton family under arrest for violation of federal law, illegal seizure of lands, and conspiracy to commit murder. Jacob went for his gun, but 3 marshals had their weapons trained on him before his hand touched the handle. I wouldn't, son, Marshal Henderson advised. Your reign of terror is over. James felt his knees nearly buckle with relief. His message had gotten through, and faster than he dared hope. As the Wheatons were disarmed and bound, Marshal Henderson approached James. Captain Turner, good to see you again, though I wish it were under better circumstances. John, James gripped his old friend's hand. Your timing is impeccable. Got your telegram. Rode hard with my best men. Henderson looked toward the shed. This the woman they tortured? The woman I'm marrying tomorrow, James corrected firmly. Henderson grinned. Well then, I'd best stick around for the wedding. Make sure there's no more trouble. As the marshals led the Wheatons away, James returned to the shed. Martha stood in the doorway. His children gathered around her, all of them covered in snow but smiling. Is it over? Martha asked. The beginning, James corrected, pulling her into his arms. It's just the beginning. The Turner homestead sat nestled in a valley 10 miles from Cedar Ridge, surrounded by cottonwoods that whispered secrets to the wind. Martha stood at the threshold of the modest 2-story farmhouse, still wearing the simple blue dress Mrs. Morrison had secretly provided for her wedding 3 weeks prior. Behind her, she could hear the children arguing about whose turn it was to feed the chickens. Thomas, you're too little, Benjamin insisted. You'll scare them again. Will not, Thomas protested. His voice carrying that particular whine of a 4-year-old denied his heart's desire. Martha turned from the doorway, her voice gentle but firm. Benjamin, take your brother with you. Show him the proper way to scatter the feed. Sarah, come help me with the bread. It still amazed her how naturally the words came not as Mrs. Collins, the town pariah, but as Mrs. Turner, mother to 3 spirited children. The transition hadn't been seamless, though. Those first days had tested everyone. The morning after their hasty wedding, performed by a nervous Reverend Davis with Marshal Henderson as witness. Martha had attempted to make breakfast. She'd burned the eggs, oversalted the porridge, and somehow managed to set a dish towel on fire. Sarah had looked at the charred remains skeptically. "Mama never burned the eggs," she'd said, not cruelly, just observantly. Martha had sunk into a chair, ready to cry. When James entered the kitchen, he'd surveyed the damage, then calmly began making fresh breakfast. "Your mama," he'd told Sarah, "had years to learn this kitchen. Give Mrs. Martha time." But time had revealed deeper challenges than burned food. At night, Martha still woke gasping from nightmares, her back aching with phantom pain from the whipping. James would hold her, not speaking, just present. Some mornings, she could barely look at herself in the mirror, Jacob Wheaton's cruel words echoing in her mind. The children, however, were relentless in their innocent acceptance. Thomas had taken to climbing into her lap every evening, demanding stories. Sarah brought her wildflowers daily, decorating the house with splashes of color, and Benjamin, serious beyond his 8 years, had appointed himself her protector. "Nobody's gonna say mean things about you, Mrs. Martha," he declared that first week. "I won't let 'em." The challenge had come sooner than expected. 2 weeks into their marriage, James had needed supplies from town. Martha had wanted to stay home, but James insisted gently that she couldn't hide forever. Cedar Ridge received them with a mixture of curiosity and hostility. The Wheaton family's arrest had shifted the power dynamics, but old prejudices died hard. Women whispered behind their hands, men averted their eyes, and Martha felt every stare like a physical weight. They'd entered Morrison's store to find Mrs. Garrett holding court with several other women. The conversation stopped abruptly. "Well, Mrs." Garrett had said, her voice dripping disapproval, "I suppose congratulations are in order, though what kind of marriage can be built on such unusual foundations?" James had stepped forward, but Martha touched his arm, finding strength she didn't know she possessed, the same kind built by any two people who choose to face life together. Mrs. Garrett, with respect, understanding, and love. "Love, Mrs." Garrett had laughed. "After 3 weeks. My late wife and I fell in love in 3 days," James had said quietly. "Time doesn't determine the heart's capacity for connection." Now, standing in her kitchen, Martha smiled at the memory. The bread dough beneath her hands was smooth and elastic, properly kneaded. Sarah stood on a stool beside her, flour dusting her nose. "Mrs. Martha, why don't you have any babies in your tummy?" Sarah asked suddenly, with the directness only a 6-year-old could manage. Martha's hands stilled. It was the question she dreaded, the one that still woke her at night. "Sometimes," she said carefully, "God doesn't give everyone babies of their own, but sometimes He gives them other children to love instead." "Like us?" Sarah asked. "Exactly like you," Martha said, kissing the top of the girl's head. The sound of horses approaching made them both look up. Through the window, Martha saw James returning from the far pasture with a neighbor, Tom Bradley, the young blacksmith's apprentice from town. Mrs. Turner." Tom tipped his hat as they entered. "You're looking well." It was the first time anyone from town besides the Morrisons had addressed her respectfully since the whipping. Martha felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you. Tom, will you stay for dinner?" "I'd be honored," he said, then added quietly, "What them Wheatons did wasn't right. Lots of folks knew it but were too scared to say. You showing up in town, head high, married to the captain here, it's giving others courage to speak up." James washed his hands at the basin, catching Martha's eye with a warm smile. "Tom's been helping me repair the barn. Says there's others willing to help too, now that the Wheatons can't retaliate. People are remembering what Cedar Ridge was like before the Wheatons took control," Tom explained. "When neighbors helped neighbors. When justice meant something more than who had the most money." That evening, as they sat around the dinner table, Tom having stayed as promised, Martha watched this assembled group with wonder. Benjamin was explaining his plans for a vegetable garden come spring. Sarah was insisting they needed a cat for the barn, and Thomas was carefully eating his stew, proud to be using a big spoon like everyone else. "Martha makes the best cornbread in Montana," James declared, making her blush. "It's just cornbread," she protested. "Nothing just about it," Tom said, taking another piece. "My ma would love this recipe." After Tom left and the children were in bed, James and Martha sat on the porch despite the cold, wrapped in a quilt Mary had made years before. The stars were brilliant in the clear night sky. "Do you think she would have minded?" Martha asked suddenly. "Mary, I mean, me being here, raising her children." James was quiet for a moment. Mary was practical above all else. She'd have wanted the children cared for, loved, and she would have liked your strength, your kindness despite everything you've endured. "I'm not strong," Martha said. "I'm terrified every day. Terrified I'll fail them, fail you. Terrified the town will never accept us. Terrified that the Wheatons were right about me being—" "Stop," James said firmly, turning to face her. "The Wheatons were wrong about everything. You've brought life back to this house." Benjamin laughs more. Sarah sings constantly. Thomas actually speaks in complete sentences now instead of just pointing and grunting. "And you?" Martha asked softly. "Me," James pulled her closer. "I remember what it feels like to have hope again, to not dread coming home to an empty house and grieving children. You've given us back our family. Martha." A coyote howled in the distance, the same lonely sound Martha had heard that terrible night after her whipping. But now, safe in James's arms, with sleeping children in the house behind them, it didn't sound lonely at all. It sounded wild and free and alive. "James," she said suddenly, "I need to tell you something. About Samuel, about why we never had children." "You don't owe me explanations." "I want to," she interrupted. "Doc Morrison told me, after Samuel died, he'd been sick as a child, fevered for weeks. It likely left him unable to father children, but he knew. He knew and still blamed me. Let his family blame me, because his pride couldn't bear the truth." James's arms tightened around her. "That changes nothing about how I feel, about how the children feel." "I know," Martha said, and surprisingly, she did know. "But I needed to say it, to someone who would believe me." "I believe you," James said simply. "I believe in you." Inside the house, footsteps padded across the floor. The door opened, and Thomas appeared, dragging his blanket. "Papa, Mrs. Martha, I had a scary dream." Martha stood, scooping the little boy into her arms. "Come on, sweet one. Let's get you back to bed. Want me to sing you the Mockingbird song?" "Yes, please," Thomas mumbled, already half asleep against her shoulder. As she carried him inside, James following. Martha realized that these simple moments of comfort and care were slowly healing the wounds the Wheatons had inflicted. She was becoming who she was meant to be, not the barren woman of Cedar Ridge's judgment, but Martha Turner wife, mother, survivor, and finally, home. The spring of 1888 had brought unexpected prosperity to the Turner homestead. The vegetable garden Benjamin had planned was thriving, and James had acquired 3 more milk cows through honest trade. But with the Wheaton brothers' trial approaching in the territorial court, darkness was gathering like storm clouds on the horizon. Martha first noticed something was wrong when she went to feed the chickens one April morning. Half the flock was dead, their necks wrung, bodies scattered across the coop. Sarah, who'd followed her out, screamed at the sight. "Get your father," Martha said quietly, shielding the girl from the carnage. James arrived quickly, taking in the scene with a soldier's assessment. "This wasn't animals," he said grimly. "Too deliberate." That was just the beginning. Over the next week, their fence posts were cut, letting cattle wander. The well was poisoned with a dead skunk. And then came the note. Nailed to their door in the dead of night, Wheaton friends remember. Abandon the trial or lose everything. We should tell Marshal Henderson, Martha urged, holding the threatening note with trembling hands. He's in Helena for the trial preparations, James said. Won't be back for 2 weeks. The children had grown quiet and watchful. Benjamin started carrying his father's old hunting knife. Sarah wouldn't leave Martha's side. Thomas had returned to sucking his thumb. On the 10th night after the threats began, they came. Martha woke to the smell of smoke. James, she shook her husband awake. Fire! The barn was ablaze, orange flames licking at the night sky. James grabbed his rifle while Martha gathered the children, but as they rushed outside, 5 masked men emerged from the shadows. Well, well, one said, his voice muffled but familiar. The happy family. Martha recognized the build. The stance, Hank Barnett, Jacob Wheaton's old foreman, who'd escaped arrest by being out of town during the federal raid. Let my family go, James said, rifle raised. This is between us. Nothing personal, Turner, Barnett said. But the Wheatons paid good money to see you ruined before the trial. Can't have you testifying about what you know. Papa? Benjamin's voice was small, terrified. It's going to be all right, son, James said, though Martha heard the uncertainty. One of the masked men laughed. Maybe we should finish what Jacob started with your woman. 100 lashes wasn't enough for a baron. The shot came from behind them. Tom Bradley stood at the edge of the property, rifle smoking. Next one won't be a warning, he called out. Behind him, more riders appeared, townspeople Martha recognized. Morrison, the shopkeeper. Peterson, the livery owner. Even old Mrs. Henderson with her late husband's shotgun. Seems you miscalculated, Barnett, James said, relief flooding his voice. Cedar Ridge isn't Wheaton territory anymore. But Barnett wasn't finished. In one swift motion, he grabbed Sarah, who'd wandered too close. The girl screamed as he pressed a knife to her throat. Everyone back off, or the girl. Martha moved before thought, before fear. The months of carrying water buckets had strengthened her arms. The peace of family life had steadied her nerves. She grabbed the hot iron poker from beside the burning barn and swung it with all her might, catching Barnett across the knee. He dropped, releasing Sarah, who ran to James. The other masked men, seeing the gathering crowd and their leader down, scattered into the night. Tom Bradley and others gave chase while Martha collapsed beside her stepdaughter, checking her for injuries. You saved me, Sarah sobbed, clinging to Martha. You saved me, Mama. It was the first time any of the children had called her Mama without the Mrs. in front. Martha held her tight, tears streaming down her face. The barn was lost, but the neighbors formed a bucket brigade to save the house. As dawn broke, revealing the smoking ruins, Marshal Henderson arrived with a contingent of federal officers, having ridden through the night after receiving Tom's urgent telegram. Barnett's in custody. He informed them. And he's talking. Seems the Wheaton family has been paying folks from 3 counties over to cause trouble. This is going to make the trial even more significant. Over the next days, something remarkable happened. People from Cedar Ridge began arriving at the Turner homestead. They brought lumber for a new barn, livestock to replace what was lost, and most surprisingly, apologies. Mrs. Garrett herself appeared on the 4th day, her usual prideful demeanor replaced with humility. Mrs. Turner, she said, I was wrong. About you. About everything. Seeing you protect that child. Standing up to those men. I'm ashamed of how I treated you. Martha, exhausted from nights of little sleep and days of rebuilding, simply nodded. We all do what we think is right at the time. Mrs. Garrett. No, the older woman said firmly. Some of us do what's easy. What's safe. You and your husband do what's right. There's a difference. The barn raising became a community event. Men who'd once avoided Martha now tipped their hats respectfully. Women who'd whispered behind their hands now brought casseroles and offers to watch the children. During the construction, Doc Morrison pulled Martha aside. "I've something to tell you," he said quietly. "About Samuel. I've been corresponding with a physician in Chicago who specializes in fertility matters. Based on what I described about Samuel's childhood fever, he confirms it almost certainly left him sterile. I'm prepared to testify to this at the trial if needed." Martha felt a weight she hadn't known she was still carrying lift from her shoulders. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me," Doc Morrison said gruffly. "I should have spoken up years ago. Cowardice is its own sin." That evening, as the new barn stood proud against the sunset, the Turner family sat on their porch alongside many of their neighbors. Tom Bradley had brought his fiddle, and music drifted across the valley. Benjamin, emboldened by the communal atmosphere, stood up. "I want to say something," he announced, his young voice carrying surprising authority. "People been mean to my new mama for a long time, but she's the bravest person I know. She saved my sister. She makes our house happy, and anyone who says different will answer to me." "And me," Thomas piped up, though at 4, his fierce expression was more adorable than intimidating. "And me," Sarah said quietly, still not straying far from Martha's side since the attack. James stood, raising his cup of cider. "To family," he said, looking directly at Martha. "Blood makes you related, but loyalty makes you family, and to neighbors who remember what that means." The toast was echoed across the porch, and Martha felt something she hadn't experienced since before her first marriage, belonging. Later, after the neighbors had gone and the children were asleep, James found Martha standing in the doorway of the new barn, breathing in the smell of fresh lumber. "Regrets?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "No," she said, leaning into his warmth. "For the first time in my life, no regrets." "Barnett could have killed Sarah," James said, his voice tight. "If you hadn't—" "But I did," Martha interrupted. "That's what mothers do. They protect their children." "Their children," James repeated, smiling. "Yes, I suppose that's what they are now, fully and completely." A week later, at the Wheaton trial, Martha testified with a clear voice about her treatment, about the torture she'd endured. Doc Morrison provided his medical testimony. The federal prosecutor presented evidence of land theft, intimidation, and attempted murder. The Wheaton brothers were sentenced to 20 years hard labor. Their empire crumbled, their lands redistributed to the families they'd stolen from. As Martha and James left the courthouse, Sarah between them and the boys running ahead, Martha noticed something. People weren't staring at her with pity or disgust anymore. They were looking at her with respect. "Mrs. Turner." A young woman she didn't recognize approached hesitantly. "I just wanted to say, your courage in speaking out, it's helped others find their voice too. Thank you." That night, back at the homestead, as Martha tucked Thomas into bed, he looked up at her with sleepy eyes. "Mama, are the bad men gone forever?" "Yes, sweet one," she said, smoothing his hair. "We're safe now." "Good," he mumbled, already drifting off. "Love you, Mama." Martha stood in the doorway, watching him sleep, her hand resting on her stomach where, unknown to everyone but her and Doc Morrison, new life was beginning to grow, a miracle that shouldn't have been possible, but was. The wounds on her back had healed into scars. The wounds in her heart were mending with each passing day, and the future, once so dark and hopeless, now stretched before them bright with promise. The letter arrived on a humid July morning, carried by a young rider from Helena who seemed relieved to finally deliver it. Martha was kneading bread when James brought it inside, his face grave. "It's from a doctor, Edmund Hartley in Chicago," he said, breaking the seal. "Says he's Samuel's cousin." Martha's hands stilled in the dough. She'd never heard Samuel mention any cousins, but then he'd rarely spoken of family beyond his immediate kin in Cedar Ridge. James read aloud, I have recently learned of my cousin's passing and the unfortunate circumstances surrounding your treatment by the Wheaton family. As a physician specializing in reproductive health, I feel compelled to share information that may bring you some measure of justice and peace." Martha sank into a chair, flour still dusting her hands. James continued reading. "Samuel consulted me 5 years ago about his inability to father children. My examination confirmed what I suspected: the scarlet fever he suffered at age 12 had left him sterile. I advised him to be honest with his wife, but he refused, saying it would damage his standing in the community. I have sworn affidavits from my consultation notes, which I am prepared to present to any legal authority." The letter went on to express Dr. Hartley's regret for not speaking sooner, his fear of the Wheaton family's reach, and his relief that justice had finally been served through the recent trial. Martha sat in stunned silence. 5 years ago, before they'd even married, Samuel had known all along. "He knew," she whispered. "He knew, and he let them." Her voice broke. James set the letter aside and knelt before her, taking her flour-covered hands in his. "Martha, this changes everything. The whole town needs to know the truth." "No," Martha said quickly, then paused. I need to think." That evening, after the children were asleep, Martha stood on the porch, one hand resting on her growing belly still hidden beneath her loose dress. Still her secret. The doctor's letter lay on the table inside, its revelations weighing on her mind. "You're thinking too hard," James said, joining her. "I can practically hear the wheels turning. If we share this letter, everyone will know the truth," Martha said slowly. "The remaining Wheaton supporters will be forced to acknowledge their mistake. But it also means dragging Samuel's name through the mud. He's dead. James. He can't defend himself or apologize or make amends." James was quiet for a moment. "The man let you be tortured for his lie." "I know," Martha said. "But I'm thinking about the future, not the past, about our child." She took his hand and placed it on her stomach, finally sharing her secret. James's eyes widened. "Martha, are you—" "Doc Morrison confirmed it last week. Despite everything, somehow, we're having a baby." James pulled her into his arms, laughing and crying simultaneously. "A baby, our baby. And I don't want this child born into a world of vengeance and old hatred." Martha continued. "I want to move forward, not back." They decided to share the truth selectively. Doc Morrison would keep Dr. Hartley's letter in his medical files. Reverend Davis would be told, as would Marshall Henderson. But there would be no public announcement, no grand revelation in the town square. However, truth has a way of spreading like wildfire in small towns. Within a week, whispers began circulating. Mrs. Garrett, who'd become Martha's unlikely ally, confronted her directly at the general store. "Is it true?" she asked bluntly. "About Samuel?" Martha met her gaze steadily. "The past is past, Mrs. Garrett. I'm focused on the future." The older woman studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You're a better woman than I'd be in your position." "No," Martha said. "I'm just tired of anger. It's too heavy to carry, especially now." She placed a hand on her visible bump. Mrs. Garrett's eyes widened. "Oh, my dear, but they said you couldn't—" "Doctors don't know everything," Martha said simply. The news of Martha's pregnancy spread even faster than the truth about Samuel. Some called it a miracle. Others suggested she'd never been barren at all, that it had always been Samuel's failing. The irony wasn't lost on Martha that her pregnancy did more to vindicate her than any medical testimony could have. One afternoon in August, as Martha was teaching Sarah to sew, unexpected visitors arrived. 3 women stood at her door, wives of former Wheaton ranch hands who'd participated in her public punishment. Mrs. Turner," the eldest, Agnes Murphy, spoke first. "We've come to apologize, our husbands, what they did, what we let happen." Your husbands were following orders, Martha said carefully. That's no excuse, Agnes said firmly. We knew it was wrong. We stood there and watched and did nothing. We're ashamed. The youngest of the three, barely 20 herself, started crying. I wanted to speak up, but I was so scared. I'm sorry, Mrs. Turner, so very sorry. Martha looked at these women, saw their genuine remorse, and made a choice. Would you like to come in for tea? They spent the afternoon in Martha's kitchen, the initial awkwardness giving way to genuine conversation. The women shared their own struggles, the fear of opposing the Wheatons, the relief when they'd been arrested, the difficulty of rebuilding their lives after their husbands lost their jobs at the ranch. Fear makes cowards of us all sometimes, Martha said, pouring more tea. What matters is what we do once the fear passes. As they were leaving, Agnes pressed a small package into Martha's hands. We made this for the baby. All three of us worked on it. Inside was a beautiful baby blanket, intricately stitched with wildflowers native to Montana. Martha's eyes filled with tears. It's beautiful. Thank you. That Sunday, Reverend Davis delivered a sermon about forgiveness and redemption that everyone knew was really about Martha and the town's treatment of her. He spoke of stones cast in judgment, of logs in eyes while seeing specks in others, of the grace found in forgiveness. We have, all of us, failed at times to show Christian charity, he said, his voice carrying across the packed church. But redemption is always possible for those who truly repent. After the service, something unprecedented happened. One by one, people approached Martha and James. Some offered brief apologies. Others simply pressed their hands in silent acknowledgement. Old Mr. Patterson, who'd been particularly vocal in supporting the Wheatons, stood before Martha with tears in his eyes. I have 5 daughters, he said hoarsely. If anyone had done to them what was done to you, I'm sorry. Mrs. Turner, deeply sorry. By the end of summer, the transformation of Cedar Ridge was complete. The Wheaton Ranch had been divided and sold to multiple families, bringing new life to the community. The town council, no longer under Wheaton control, had repealed the cruel old laws that had allowed Martha's punishment. And Martha herself had become something of a symbol not of shame or barrenness, but of resilience and grace. One evening, as she sat with James and the children, Benjamin asked, Mama, do you forgive them, all of them? Martha considered the question carefully. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. Ben, it's choosing to let go of the anger so it doesn't poison your future. So yes, I forgive them, not for their sake, but for ours. Even the Wheatons? Sarah asked. Even them, Martha said. They're paying for their crimes in prison. Adding my hatred won't increase their punishment, but it would darken our happiness. James reached over and took her hand. You're remarkable. You know that? No, Martha said, feeling the baby kick within her. I'm just a woman who learned that bitterness is a luxury I can't afford. Not when I have so much to live for. As the sun set over the Montana mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Martha looked around at her family, the children she'd inherited, the husband she'd found in the darkest time, the baby growing within her, and knew that every moment of pain had led to this abundance of joy. Tomorrow, there would be chores and challenges. There would be memories that still stung and scars that still ached. But tonight, there was peace. Tonight, there was family. Tonight, there was home. Spring arrived early in 1889, painting the Montana Valley with wildflowers that stretched as far as the eye could see. Martha Turner stood in the doorway of their expanded farmhouse, baby Elizabeth cooing in her arms, watching as James taught Benjamin how to guide the plow. Sarah and Thomas ran through the newly planted fields, their laughter carrying on the warm breeze. It had been 1 year since Elizabeth's birth, a birth that Doc Morrison still called miraculous. Given everything Martha had endured, the baby had arrived during a February blizzard, with Mrs. Garrett and Agnes Murphy serving as midwives when the doctor couldn't make it through the snow. The women who had once shunned Martha now fought for the privilege of holding her daughter. "Mama, look," Sarah called, running up with a handful of purple lupines. "For baby Lizzie." Martha smiled, tucking a flower behind her daughter's ear. Sarah had grown 2 inches this year, and at 8, she was becoming quite the young lady. "They're beautiful, sweetheart. Why don't you put them in water for the dinner table?" Tonight was special. They were hosting a celebration not just for Elizabeth's first birthday, which had been in February, but for the anniversary of their family's true beginning. 1 year since the Wheaton trial ended. 1 year since Cedar Ridge chose redemption over revenge. Tom Bradley arrived first, no longer the young apprentice, but now the town's primary blacksmith, having taken over when old Mr. Schmidt retired. He brought his new bride, Catherine, whom he'd met at a harvest dance Martha had helped organize. "I'm Mrs. Turner," Catherine said shyly. "Tom's told me so much about your courage. I'm honored to finally meet you properly." "Please, call me Martha," she said warmly. And courage is just another word for having no other choice but to keep going. The Morrison brothers arrived next, bringing supplies from the store as a gift. Then came Reverend Davis with his family, the Pattersons, Agnes Murphy with her children, and even Marshall Henderson, who'd returned from Helena specifically for the occasion. As the sun began to set, James stood to address the gathered crowd in their yard. "A year ago, we were still healing from darkness. Martha and I want to thank each of you for helping us build not just a home, but a community." "To the Turners," Tom Bradley called out, raising his glass. But Martha stood. Elizabeth balanced on her hip. "If I may," she said, her voice carrying clearly, "I want to say something." The gathering fell silent, all eyes on the woman who'd become the heart of their renewed community. "2 years ago, I was publicly whipped 100 times, Martha said, her voice steady. Several people shifted uncomfortably, but she continued. "I was called barren, worthless, a failure as a woman. I lost everything: my dignity, my home, my hope." She looked at James, drawing strength from his encouraging nod. "But that wasn't my ending. It was my beginning. Every strike of that whip stripped away illusions about what matters, about who deserves love, about what makes a family." Little Thomas tugged on her skirt, and she lifted him with her free arm, holding both him and Elizabeth. "These children gave me purpose when I had none. This man," she gestured to James, "gave me love when I thought I was unlovable. And all of you, even those who once stood silent, taught me that people can change, can grow, can choose to be better." She took a breath, looking at each face in turn. "The scars on my back will never fully fade, but I wouldn't erase them if I could. They're proof that I survived. They're proof that cruelty doesn't win if we don't let it. They're part of my story, but they're not my whole story." Elizabeth gurgled and reached for her mother's face, patting her cheek with a chubby hand. The gathering laughed, breaking the solemn moment. "What my wife is too modest to say," James interjected, "is that she's the strongest person any of us know. She faced injustice and chose forgiveness. She encountered cruelty and responded with kindness. She was told she was barren and gave birth to a miracle." "2 miracles," Martha said softly, placing her hand on her stomach. "Doc Morrison confirmed it yesterday." The yard erupted in congratulations. Sarah danced with joy at the prospect of another sibling, while Benjamin, now 11 and very serious, immediately began planning how to expand the nursery. As the celebration continued into the evening, Marshall Henderson pulled James and Martha aside. "I have news from Helena," he said. "The territorial government is passing new laws, the Martha Turner laws. They're calling them unofficially. No person can be subjected to corporal punishment for perceived family failures. What happened to you will never legally happen to another woman in Montana." Martha's eyes filled with tears. "They're calling them that?" "Your testimony at the trial, your dignity through everything it moved people. Martha, changed minds. That's a legacy worth having. Later, as their guests departed and the children were tucked into bed, Martha and James sat on their porch swing, watching the stars emerge. The same stars she'd stared at through the gaps in that ramshackle shed, wondering if she'd survive the night. "Do you ever think about if we'd never met?" James asked. "If I'd chosen a different town or arrived a day later?" "No," Martha said firmly. "I don't believe in dwelling on might-have-beens. We met when we were supposed to meet. We became a family when we needed to become a family. Even though it meant facing all that danger, the Wheatons, the fire, the threats." Martha turned to look at him, this man who'd seen her at her lowest and chosen to lift her up. "James Turner, you and those children saved my life, not just from poverty or loneliness, but from despair. I would face 1,000 Wheatons for the life we have now." A coyote howled in the distance, that same sound that had once emphasized her isolation. Now it was just part of the night symphony, no more threatening than the wind through the cottonwoods. "Mama," Sarah's voice came from the doorway. "I can't sleep. Will you tell us the story?" "What story, sweetheart?" "The one about the brave woman who got knocked down but got back up. The one about us." Martha smiled, standing and reaching for her daughter's hand. "Come on then, but let's tell it properly this time. Once upon a time, in a valley surrounded by mountains that touched the sky, there lived a woman who thought her story was over." As she led Sarah inside, James following, Martha thought about the journey from that horrible morning in the town square to this night of abundance. Every strike of the whip had tried to tell her she was nothing, but here she was, wife, mother, friend, neighbor, survivor, thriver. The next morning brought a surprise visitor. A well-dressed woman from back east stood at their door, notebook in hand. "Mrs. Turner, I'm Louise Hartley from the Boston Women's Advocate newspaper. I've traveled here to write your story, if you'll share it. Women across the country need to know that survival is possible, that injustice doesn't have the final word." Martha looked at James, then at her children eating breakfast, Elizabeth in her high chair painted with mashed carrots, and made her decision. "Come in, Miss Hartley. I'll tell you everything. But understand, this isn't just my story. It's the story of a family that chose love over fear, a community that chose redemption over revenge, and a woman who learned that sometimes the greatest triumph isn't in never falling, but in how we rise." As she began to speak, her words carrying through the open windows and across the fields where wildflowers bloomed in defiance of the harsh Montana soil, Martha realized that every painful step had led to this moment. She had been whipped 100 times, but she had risen 101. The Montana sun climbed higher, warming the land and the hearts of all who dwelt there, and in the Turner homestead, where love had conquered cruelty and hope had defeated despair. A new chapter was beginning not just for one family, but for all who would hear their story and find courage to face their own storms. For in the end, Martha Turner's greatest revenge against those who had tried to break her was simple. She had refused to stay broken. She had chosen to bloom where she'd been planted, even if that soil had once been watered with tears and blood. And in that blooming, she had given others permission to grow beyond their own pain, to reach for their own unlikely happiness, to believe in their own impossible resurrections. Thank you so much for listening to this story from the Wild West. I hope Martha Turner's journey touched your heart as much as it touched mine while sharing it with you. Please comment below and let me know where you're listening from. I love connecting with listeners from around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel for more authentic stories of courage, redemption, and love from America's frontier days. Share your thoughts about Martha and James's story in the comments. What part resonated with you the most? Until next time, partners, keep riding toward your own sunset of hope.